Late August 1924. Milo had considered it, since even before the letter had arrived from Prue to her rooms at Cambridge. Jack Prue needed to leave. His time in self-imposed exile had come to an end, and if she were to declare the clandestine, there had to be witnesses, including Thomas. And, of course, there was the grave effects of what might happen if Tom Branson ignored the Troscad. "Are you prepared for all of this?" Prue had asked her, when Milo arrived that afternoon. She had asked for 2 days' leave from the Cavendish, for the memorial service for her brother Ernest, and Rutherford and Chadwick had both wished her well. She was to give her decision about Göttingen in a few days. Rutherford had had a letter from Max Planck in Berlin, confirming the offer for 3 scientists to work there. Milo wanted to go, that was certain, and although she knew little German, she knew she would be able to learn it. Otto Friss had been teaching her some, and she had taught him a little Irish, although what amused him the most was the written language of Ogham. They had left a few marks to one another around the laboratory, certain that only Milo or Frisch would be able to understand them. So while Jack Prue's letter was unexpected, she did expect that he would think of something like this. He had been behind the acquittal of 2 men using the ancient Brehon laws in court in Ireland. Prue, whose lineage was long and deep and strong, whose desire for a free land was as vital as oxygen. She had arrived that afternoon and walked to her old house. Prue had made up her old bed, assuming, correctly, that she would wish to stay there that night. And once she had sat with him, and they had gone over the details, Prue had asked for Thomas to come. Thomas seemed taken aback when he saw Milo, but not as surprised as she felt about her own emotions. She was about to confront her attacker, but, more than that, forever the claim Tom Branson had declared that he thought he had. It went like this: a versteller, or a bard, had the power to declare a clandestine, an accusation against a wrongdoer. According to the Brehon laws, the same laws by which Tom Branson had dared to rape her in order to de facto become her guardian, and inherit her father's money and his property, the versteller had to accuse the guilty person in public, and state the wrongdoing, and tell him what recompense was required. Should he not accept it, Milo was to begin a Troscad, a public fast, by which he would sit outside the door of the accuser until he gave in, thus bringing shame and humiliation to him by such an extreme action being brought to his house. But there was, of course, a serious element to all of this, that the wrongdoer would never accept their crime, and instead, the person undergoing the fast may risk starvation to death. So it was this outlandish situation that Prue and Milo explained to Thomas how Tom Branson was going to be punished, living by the law he had used against her, and therefore held to account by this law. "And Agassiz?" Thomas asked, his mind reeling from the ideas that had been told to him, by Jack Prue and, more worryingly, Milo. She was saying she was prepared to starve herself to death. Truly? Agassiz an obligation, or a forbiddance, Prue told him. Whether or not he accepts his guilt, Miss Melusina may place this on him, and he must follow it, or risk shame, or rejection by his family. But Thomas looked to Milo, too stunned even to pick up the whiskey Prue had poured for him. "Milo," Thomas said, turning to her. "Is what Prue's saying here true?" he asked her. "Or have you both been on too much of this?" He gestured towards the tumbler. Milo shook her head and looked to Jack Prue. "Miss Melusina will do what she needs to do to set straight the wrong that was done to her," Prue told him, "and, ultimately, the wrong done to you as her husband." He nodded his head. "She must begin by telling us what happened that night." Prue looked to Thomas. "Sit, Mr. Barrow," Prue offered Melusina. But if his wife was about to sit beside Thomas and explain how Tom Branson had attacked her, his curiosity was shoved aside, replaced by anger and outrage. Milo, though tears that he knew of old, paced the living room and told them, Prue witnessing every word as she stood by the door of the kitchen, including Lady Mary's scolding of her, and Thomas's reinforcement of the scolding. If only he had known. Thomas scolded himself. To think he had stood the while she looked at him, and didn't speak, to think she had been subjected to that. "Please believe me, Thomas," Milo declared, beginning to sob. "I did not ask this of him. I did not lead him on. I entered no agreement with Tom Branson, and I did not ... I did not, and Thomas Barrow crossed to her, and let her lean on his chest, as he held her lightly at her back. Over 2 years kept inside her, and now it had hit her, the realization of what Tom Branson had done. Her head felt heavy, her heart sore. To think that he had just lived his life carefree, no sign of acknowledgement of his crime, no sign of regret. Thomas held her near him and she sighed into his chest. So, it was true, he thought. Hearing it from her own lips had been the worst part. How he had pushed her onto Lady Mary's bed, and pushed himself into her. Not for long, it seemed, although Milo seemed confused on time, although quite clear on the act. "I am going to kill him," Thomas declared, savagely, as Milo pressed her head to his shoulder. Then, he led her to the sitting room chair and sat beside her, picking up the tumbler of whiskey. "No, Thomas, you are not," Prue cautioned him. "We are following Brehon law, ancient Irish law. There are certain things we need," Prue explained, carefully, "for this to go ahead as we have planned." Milo picked up her head. Was her transgression not going to be discussed, then? She hoped it would not matter much. But all the same, it was written into law. There had been an example with the wife of King Chopar Mac Nessa, after all. And she just hadn't done it, because of how quick the attack had been. "So what are you proposing?" Thomas asked Jack Prue. "You have clearly given this a lot of thought." "First, you need to be present," Prue told Thomas. "And there needs to be a witness, of Irish blood." He leaned towards Thomas and smiled a toothy smile. "You?" Thomas asked. "No, someone else Irish. Do you know of someone you trust, Mr. Barrow?" he asked. "Even with one grandparent, that's enough." Thomas lowered his whiskey glass. He did. Bates had offered to help any way he could. Let's see if he stood by his word. "What about you?" Thomas asked, still hardly believing what was about to happen. Was Milo really going to confront Tom Branson? Milo turned to him. She had not let go of his hand since they sat, and this time added another hand to his. "Jack, in his position, needs to declare me as bard," she told him. "As verse teller, poet." "There is no direct translation of the word in English," she added. Thomas looked up to see Jack Prue smiling a little at the corners of his lips. "Once done, me Lucina will be telling him the compensation you shall receive." "Compensation?" Thomas repeated. "At once." "Not money, or material goods," Prue added. "Obligations." "You will agree me Lucina's life would be happier if she never saw him again." "Would I echoes like?" Thomas shot back. "Then, that's one," Prue said, nodding to Milo. "Second, is banishment from Ireland." Thomas stared at him again, noticing the fire flickering in the grate, as he ran that through his head. "Banishment?" "I will be making it known that Tom Branson is under a case never to set foot on Erin's Isle again," he went on. "Banishment, Mr. Barrow," he clarified, under Thomas's look. "A punishment to torture his soul for the rest of his life." Thomas just nodded. Clearly, this was Irish business, and Irish people were sorting out their grievances their own way. "I still do not understand your role, Mr. Prue," Thomas prompted. Prue said nothing for a moment, just drew out a long stick from the fire and lit his cigarette. "It is fitting," Prue told him, "that it is Tom Branson of Dromond Castle. For my own part, my family have been Druid the families in Clare and Tipperary for centuries." He put the whiskey to his lips. "He is an O'Brien, almost the oldest lineage in Ireland," Prue continued. "But, my lineage is longer, much longer. I can trace my line from both of my parents to Neil of the Nine Hostages." "You are an O'Neill?" Thomas asked. Not that he remembered much at school, but he did remember about the flight of the Earls. "Hugh O'Neill." "I would be happy if you never spoke that name in the land of the Anglo-Saxons," Prue told him, coldly, and then brightened with a smile. "My long heritage endows me status of Druid," he added. "A Druid?" "White cloak, mistletoe." "You may jest, Mr. Barrow," Prue told him. "But number. That is revivalist dreaming. What I am is 15 centuries of authority. I will, as long as me Lucina permits it, declare her status as verse teller. And in verse form she will lay charges to Branson, the Glamdison, and then the taboo will be said, the gaze which he must follow, or risk shame, and a reputation ruined." "I know about that," Thomas said, grimly. But he was surprised when Milo narrowed her eyes, and Prue shook his head. Clearly it was more than that, something in the Irish culture, invisible to the outsider. Let them get on with it, Thomas thought, and if it means Tom Branson was being challenged for aping Milo, and would be suffering a punishment that meant something crucial to him, all well and good. But this starvation part, Thomas told Milo, his mind remembering, suddenly, it sounds ... primitive. It is primitive, Mr. Barrow, Prue told him. But you are confusing ancient with unsophisticated. This is noble, just, and allows any person, regardless of status, to bring about a protest to anyone. I do not think Tom Branson is brave enough to resist Troscad. It's highly embarrassing, for one, and would have to explain to your lordship. No, Prue shook his head. He will have no choice but to accept what we say. And me Lucina will have justice and you will have vengeance. Without a shot being fired, Thomas thought, all images of himself in front of Tom Branson fighting him fading from his mind. He turned to Milo, who was still gripping his hand. Do you trust this? Milo agreed, and then they both looked to Prue when he cleared his throat. It means you declare yourself Irish, in body, me Lucina, Prue told her. It means you risk his actions being legitimized. And Thomas watched as Milo dipped her head. I did not scream, Jack, Milo said, suddenly, her heart feeling suddenly lighter for the telling. He has this, he will know this. And then, she began to cry, big, heavy cries, burying her head into her lap. I never encouraged it, I didn't want it. But I did not scream. And Thomas's own worries were gone from his own mind. Now he could see a path that could be taken to end the sorrow for Milo for good. He kissed her cheek and told her he was pleased to see her at last. The scream, though, somehow, felt crucial. Thomas thought it was serious enough for her to cry. He held out a hand, and she took it, still looking at her knees. It is as it is, Prue told her, glancing to Thomas. Can you arrange for this tonight? The family dinner will be finished by what time, Thomas? Prue asked him. 11, at the latest, he assured them, and got to his feet. For he and John Bates, if the man would honor his word to help Milo, would see her and Prue and Tom Branson over at the chauffeur's cottage. And Milo's tears eventually stemmed, and she eventually turned her heat to Thomas, as he and Prue drank Ayer's Heart, the name that Jack had given to that particular blend of whiskey. An hour passed, and she felt better, and as resolved as she had ever been that she was going to do this glamdison. Happy birthday, Thomas, Milo told him, as he went to the door. And he felt his face crinkle into a smile. She was right, it looked as if it was going to be. And the image of a white feather was conjured in his mind. That was English business. Business of a war that Tom Branson wanted no part of. And justice for Ernest, therefore, needed an English approach. Are we all right, Milo, you and me? Thomas asked, as she opened the front door. Only, your letter. He trailed off as he looked at his wife's happy face. Forget about my letter, Thomas, Milo replied, shaking her head. I just wanted you to know you should not feel you need to be troubled by me anymore. This, she waved her hand, trouble. But Thomas took her hands. Though we are not ... lovers, me Lucina, we are still friends. Or as far as I am concerned we are, eh? He looked at her inquiringly. Eh? He added, and the doubtful expression eventually faded. I would be here for you for anything, I hope you know, and I know you would for me, too. I have been invited by the director of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute to study there, Milo told him. Next year, in the spring, in Berlin. They haven't got a Kaiser anymore, Thomas pointed out. I think the name will change eventually, she replied. The point is, can I go? The point is, you don't need to ask me, Thomas told her. The point is I do, or what was the point of you getting married to me if not to stop fortune hunters like Tom Branson? Marriage and all of its facets is not a buffet put on by Mrs. Patmore, she added, it's not pick and choose. She withdrew her hands and took a step back. We can talk later, if you haven't starved yourself to death, he added, wryly. Milo's eyes widened and she protested, it's not like that, really, only, one man did, in Dublin. It's more the show of the thing, the declaration. Milo nodded towards the living room. As Jack says, unless he wants to explain what he did to Lord Grantham, he will put a stop to the Troscad and accept what Prue and I declare. Yes, you can go to Berlin, if you feel you need me to say, Thomas told her. Except that you need to be aware of Heisenberg. He was right, he thought, as he saw Milo's face pink up at the cheeks. Can we discuss later? She asked. He likes you, Thomas told her. He wishes to be, shall we say, more than friends? Milo laughed. Honestly, Thomas, she told him, I have told you I am not interested. And even if I were, I would not break the vow I took. I would not cuckold you. Thomas moved his head, doubtfully. He seems a very persuasive man, Thomas pressed. If it is true he likes me, Milo replied, smiling for the first time that evening, then he is going to be very disappointed. She glanced past him and out into the dusk light. 11 o'clock that night. That was when it would be over, out of her mind. And Thomas would be with her. He turned to go, and took a few steps outside, before turning back and taking her hands again. I so am proud of you, Milo, Thomas told her, for everything you've done, everything you are. Milo was about to speak, and deny the praise, but Thomas planted a gentle kiss on her cheek. And the brave things you are going to do tonight, he added. Not many people would be doing that. And I'll be right there with you.